my cousin shouldn't have been seated with the kids. We were at my mother's house in Dearborn for Sunday dinner, the long table creaking under pierogies and pot roast and a cherry pie that hadn't quite set. Everyone was full and loose and loud, the way my family gets when the Lions somehow don't ruin a weekend. That's when Tyler, age 10 and allergic to secrets, leaned across the dessert plates and said, as if he were reciting something from school, Aunt Nina slept over at Rodolfo's loft. He blinked, proud he'd said the grown-up thing right. The table went quiet in a way that pushed sound out the windows. My wife's fork touched her saucer and made a single, stupid chime. The cherry pie trembled like it wanted out. I'm a manufacturing engineer. I spend my days coaxing stubborn machines to behave, running tolerances until they give up their excuses. I believe in measurements, not omens. But my stomach knew before my head did that loft was a word that did not belong in our lives. The last time I'd heard Nina say it, she was talking about a magazine spread and a couch you weren't supposed to actually sit on. My mother, who has endured more than any woman should without ever once learning how to whisper, asked Tyler to repeat what he said. Nina's fingers went to the little gold cross at her throat and pressed like it might have a button on the back for this moment. Tyler, oblivious, said it again. My mother smiled the way mothers smile when they are about to redo the seating chart for your soul, and she asked him how he knew. He said, at the reception, after the fundraiser, we went with Mom to the gallery and I fell asleep on the rug. And when I woke up in the morning, Aunt Nina was in the kitchen and said we had to leave because it was a school day. He said Rodolfo has a very big coffee machine that goes shh like a train. I laughed. It came out wrong and dry, like something a machine makes when it's low on oil. I said, kiddo, that's a story for another time, and I put my hand on Nina's chair the way you do when you want to pretend you've got control of a vehicle that isn't actually attached to your hands. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She took a breath and put her fork down and asked my mother where she kept the good sugar for the coffee. There isn't good sugar at my mother's house. There's sugar. We drove home on streets that keep Detroit alive by pretending they were never part of it. Maple trees, flagpoles, SUVs nosed into driveways like they were plugged in. Nina turned the radio up to a station that plays songs you think you're too old for until you realize you still know the words. Halfway home, she said she'd helped Rodolfo because the gallery's HVAC had coughed itself to sleep during the fundraiser, and he needed someone to keep the kids upstairs while the repair guys did their thing. She said the word emergency, like a person who had been practicing hearing herself. Say it. I said, next time, you call me. She said, next time, you'll listen to me when I say I've got it. We didn't say loft again. The next morning before work, I opened our shared credit card account to pay the electric bill and saw two charges that put their elbows on the page. One was a jewelry store Nina loved, the kind where they give you water in a glass and call you by your first name too many times. The other was a hotel downtown, one of those glass towers that assume you like a view more than sleep. I scrolled back a month, then two. Another hotel, a boutique on Woodward. I knew by the shape of its logo more than its inventory. A cash withdrawal. I didn't recognize, not huge, but in the wrong place in the ledger with no note. I'm not the guy who snoops. Our marriage wasn't a detective novel. We were both middle kids who learned early that finding out is not the same as fixing. But our money had always been a conversation you could walk into and out of without changing clothes. I didn't remember these charges. I didn't like not remembering these charges. At work, I put a machine back online that had decided Monday was for rebellion. A belt had eaten itself and sprayed rubber shrapnel like confetti across a sensor that needed to see to do its job. I cleaned it, reseated the housing, reset the calibration. The numbers on the screen steadied to the ones I trusted, and for a second, I was a man who knew where he lived. At lunch, I opened the 529 College Fund portal on my phone the way a person touches an old scar, casually, confident it will still be there. We'd been contributing for years, not as much as the brochures recommend, but enough that when I looked at the number, I felt like a father with a plan instead of a man trying to keep the house he was in from slipping toward a mortgage rate someone at the bank invented that morning. The portal took longer to load than it ever had. When it did, the number looked wrong in a way I felt in my mouth. My tongue found a taste I hadn't put there. The balance was $6,000 and change. It used to be more than 60. At the bottom of the page, a transaction line item that hadn't been there before. Disbursement, MIMO, emergency bills, a date from 3 weeks ago, a bank routing number that was ours. The app wants you to click before it shows you detail, like it's making sure you really want the story. It said the disbursement had been requested online by the account holder. The account holder was Nina, because I put it in her name when we opened it. Told myself the kids would like to know in 30 years that their mother's name was on the papers that sent them to lectures and cafeterias and apartments that feel like freedom. The confirmation email had gone to our mail account. I hadn't seen it. Or I had seen it and filed it under a category my brain labels normal. I messaged Nina a simple, stupid thing. Hey babe, saw an emergency bills disbursement from the 529. Everything okay? 8 dots sat there and then disappeared. The iPhone way of telling you a person either thought better of a lie or decided the truth could wait. She replied with the thumbs up she would never use if she were actually okay. I called. She said she was on a PTA call about concessions for homecoming and asked if she could ring me after. I said sure, and then didn't put the phone down for an hour because I needed it near my ear even when no one was talking into it. After work, she said the words she knew would work. The school had an urgent situation, a family whose father had gotten sick, bills due, everyone pitched in, she fronted it. The 529 would be reimbursed from future PTA donations and a grant someone's aunt was applying for. She said the story like a blanket, knitted, warm, full of holes. The next week, our mortgage notice arrived with a tone I hadn't seen before. The slash of red at the top that feels like a hiss. It said past due in a font they probably test on men like me to maximize the rush to the mailbox. I called the bank and sat through the piano they play for men who should have paid on the first. When I got a human, she was kind in the way Midwestern customer service is kind. She used my first name and told me there were options and then told me we were ineligible for all of them. Nina said she'd had a mix-up with the auto pay, something about cards, something about the bank, changing a policy without telling us because they enjoy watching people practice problem solving underwater. We made a double payment and a fee. The page agreed to leave us alone for 30 days. Then my mother called and told me to get over there, now, no arguments, because she had something in her hands she could not hold alone. She was at her kitchen table when I arrived, pulling her cardigan around herself like the heat could be woven. The kids were in the living room watching a show where animated teenagers ride dragons and learn lessons softly. My mother slid a manila folder toward me. She had that tremble in her bottom lip she gets when she's angry at God for making humans. She said, "The 529 people sent me the annual statements. They always do because your name is on there too for backup." She said, "I opened it and then I sat down and then I called Father Mike to confess some words," I said out loud. Inside the folder were printouts with a tone that made me hate paper. Disbursement confirmations. A schedule of withdrawals that looked casual until you added them up. The first emergency bills. Then another labeled loan payoff. Then 2 tagged tuition, which might have been a joke if you were mean enough. The final one had no memo at all. Just a number that told a story about what was left. Nearly empty. My mother said nearly like it had been found in the back of a closet. She said, "They took the statements, son. They took them." She didn't say who they were. She meant the bank, the world, Nina, herself, me, everyone who should have stopped this from happening by standing in a doorway and refusing to move. I called Nina and asked her to come over. She said she was at the gallery, which was not a sentence I knew how to place in a day that smelled like my childhood kitchen. I told her, come anyway. She arrived with a scarf she'd picked because other people were going to look at it and shoes no one should drive in. When my mother left the room with the kids and the TV noise became a wall we pretended was privacy, I put the printouts on the table and watched her face. She touched the papers with her fingertips like they were hot and took a breath. I messed up, she said, and I hated how soft the word sounded. Like a thread you snip, thinking the garment will hold. She told me the gallery had been in trouble. She told me the fundraiser had been poorly timed and poorly attended and perfectly photographed. She told me Rodolfo had payroll and vendors and a landlord who wears Italian shirts to meetings. She told me she'd fronted a little from our account to cover a shipment, because cash flow is a disease you treat with kindness. She told me she'd meant to put it back. She told me she'd meant to put it back. She told me she'd done it again and again until the ledger stopped looking like a river and started looking like a cliff. She told me she used the 529 so she wouldn't touch our checking or the mortgage because she knew I'd noticed that. She told me she thought she could put it back before I saw it. She told me she was helping something beautiful, not die. I asked her about the music teacher, the younger guy from Lincoln Elementary, the one who made the kids sing at the winter concert like he was conducting an orchestra that could save the district. She looked at her lap. She said he had a demo he wanted to record and couldn't afford a studio. She said she loaned him a small amount to book time. And then he got invited to do a short tour of mid-sized rooms that have sticky floors and good acoustics, and he needed gas and cheap motels and something to put discs in because he insisted on making physicals. She said, he made me feel like I was 20 again. She said, I felt useful. I asked her if she had slept at Rodolfo's loft. She said yes. I asked her if she had slept with him. She said yes. I asked her if she had slept with the music teacher. She didn't answer. That was an answer. I'm not proud of the next week. I stayed at the shop late because machines make sense when humans don't. I pulled apart an entire conveyor assembly that didn't need it just to lay the parts out on clean cloth and count them and put them back. I slept in the garage on an army cot I hadn't unfolded since I was 23 and thought camping made me someone interesting. Nina slept at home and then at a friend's and then back at home and then at her mother's for a night that she called reset, a word I hate outside of my actual job. The kids asked questions you can answer and questions you cannot. Why do grown-ups use their outside voices in the kitchen? Why was Mom's car at the gallery late? Why was there a music teacher at the coffee shop with Mom on Saturday? Do we still get to go to the zoo? Do we still get to go to college? I went to Rodolfo's gallery on a Thursday when the sky over Telegraph looked like a sheet of paper a kid had erased too hard. The front room was empty except for a woman in a dress that made her look like she had been hired by the color gray. She told me R was in his office, the kind of sentence that tells you a lot about the person being called R. I walked down a hall where every piece of art looked like it had something to say to me about my taste. The office door was ajar. Inside, Rodolfo was looking at a spreadsheet on a laptop, like it had betrayed him in front of his lover. He looked up, put on the smile he keeps next to his stapler, and said my name as if we were about to share a joke. I told him I was taking our money back. He said he didn't know what I meant. I told him he did. He said I was being ugly, a word that works in certain rooms because it sounds like an aesthetic problem, not a moral one. I told him the vendors he'd been paying with money I hadn't offered him could be paid by someone else, like one of the men I had seen in the back at the fundraiser who wore suits that cost more than my car. He said the vendors were good men who had families. I told him so did I. He opened a drawer in his desk to pull out a handkerchief. Of course he had one, and when he did, a cluster of papers shifted and a notary stamp fell to the carpet. It rolled to my shoe and left a small ring of ink like a coffee cup does. I reached into the drawer without asking, like a person whose house is on fire who walks into the neighbor's kitchen to turn off a stove. I pulled out a folder labeled Accounts Payable. In it were copies of checks written from Nina to RM Gallery, all in her rounded hand, all with amounts that would look small to men who speak in funding rounds, and look like a semester when you have two kids who like the smell of new pencil boxes. Several had been notarized somewhere I didn't recognize. A PPO box near Midtown with a name that sounded like a law firm and a phone number I would later learn goes to a woman who will stamp anything put in front of her for $20 and a clean conscience. I took photos with my phone over Rodolfo's noise, the way you do when your ears aren't working anyway. He said, "You are making a spectacle." I said, "I'm making a record." I called a lawyer on Friday because there are days when you admit machines can't fix everything. His name was Feldman, and he had a way of sliding his glasses up his nose like the motion could shove truths into place. He told me to bring bank statements, texts, any emails I had. He told me we probably weren't in criminal territory unless I wanted to push hard and find out how much of a felony fit inside emergency bills. He told me we were, however, in exactly the kind of civil soup where people drown because they mistake shame for privacy. He said, "If you want to keep the house, we need to talk to the bank before they talk to me again." Then he shuffled papers like a blackjack dealer who hopes you didn't bring cash. At home, Nina said, "Do not press charges. Do not make this ugly. He'll ruin me." She didn't mean Rodolfo. I don't know who she meant. She meant the story. She meant the city who wears gossip like a scarf. She meant the school parents who would stand at the top of the bleachers pretending not to count. She meant the part of me that can take a series of numbers and turn them into a weapon. The bank had paperwork that had learned how to frown. We were 3 payments behind, despite my double and the fee, because the auto pay had not been a glitch. It had been turned off. The woman on the phone asked if I authorized that. I said no. She said the other account holder did. I asked when. She read me a date that was the day before the fundraiser. If I were a man who enjoyed poetry, I would have noticed. I didn't like who I was becoming. I was a man who printed things and circled signatures in different pens and held the papers up to the light like a detective in a show about men who never learned to speak until the last 7 minutes. I compared Nina's N's across checks. I looked at the R she wrote in RM and wondered when your hand becomes the hand of a person you wouldn't recognize at a party. I pulled a folder of emails from a PDF I didn't know had been living in our cloud. An exchange between Nina and Rodolfo that called the money advances, that promised a repayment schedule after a Q4 reopen, that used words like invest and partner when I know enough about balance sheets to know the right word is cover. Feldman said, "Bring everything." He said, "The paper will rescue you if you let it." He said, "The paper will bury you if you forget the people in it." He said he wore a suit because it keeps men like me from punching men like him when we hear the number the bank has decided is our dignity. We sat in his office in a building near Southfield that was designed to make you forget the word history. He told me our options. He was very kind in the way good lawyers are. He didn't tell me the options that had died when the first transfer happened. He told me the ones still breathing. He told us we could talk to the bank, show them a plan, bring 2 months' payments, set up a foreclosure avoidance plan that has a name softer than it is. He told us we could sell. He told us you never get what you want if you sell under a letter with red at the top. He told Nina she should consider separate counsel. She said she didn't need a lawyer. He said that was the point. When we left, Nina cried in the car with both hands on the wheel like she needed to hold on to something to keep from falling through. She said she didn't know how to say she was sorry for a number. I said she didn't have to. She said she thought if she could keep the art alive, she could keep us alive. I said we weren't a gallery, we were a house. She said the house was a gallery, always, and now there was nothing to hang. I told the bank yes to the plan with the tone of a man who knows he is losing a thing too slowly to call it sudden. I worked extra hours. I didn't have on machines that didn't deserve my temper. I cut cable at night for a contractor I didn't like because he paid cash and looked the other way when I forgot to pretend I wasn't in a hurry. My mother took the kids after school and then for full weeks because the house was turning into a sound you don't put children near. The PTA lady stopped calling Nina about concessions. The music teacher posted a video of himself at a room in Ferndale playing a song that wanted to be a hit and said thanks to everyone who believed in me in a way that made my hands shake. The confession happened at the kitchen table because that's where confessions always belong. Not at a lawyer's, not in a parking lot, not on the phone where the signal drops at exactly the moment you might forgive. The table is where our kids did math worksheets and glued together turkeys with hands traced and cut out, where my father had once wiped his mouth and told me the factory was closing, but I would be fine. The table is where you put papers when you've run out of prayers. Nina sat with her fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee like it would anchor her to the hour. She said I messed up, and I didn't stop. She said she had used the 529 to pay vendors at the gallery and to float Leon while he did his demo tour because he reminded her of a time when she could listen to a song and it didn't remind her of the mortgage rate. She said she had meant to put it back and then the number got too big to look at, so she looked at something else. She said she didn't tell me because she kept thinking of me saying no and she needed yes to exist to get through a day. She said she was sorry in a voice I hadn't heard since we were 24 and had thought we'd be different kinds of people in a different kind of city. She put a page on the table that she had printed from the gallery's email. It was a chain from Rodolfo that used the word advances as if he were generous. He had promised an investor that never materialized and asked for one more month and attached a repayment schedule that had more arrows than numbers. She put another page down, a text she'd screenshotted from Leon. It said, "You saved me," with an emoji that wants to be a prayer. He had sent a photo of a motel sign that said vacancy, and below it in white plastic letters, someone had written tonight only. She said the words I did not want and did not deserve. She said I can't do this. Not the apologies, not the school, not the PTA faces, not the bleachers, not the way people will count, not the way you will look at me when you think I'm not looking. She said, I don't know how to be the mother our kids need and the woman who did this. She said, I am sorry in a way that is shaped like a wall. She said, tell them something kind. I told her we would fix it. I told her that if the machines could be talked into working again, so could we. I told her that the kids would not remember the numbers. They would remember Saturdays and how she painted their sneakers like galaxies. I told her that my mother would forgive what women forgive when they have to. I told her I would stand next to her in the grocery store when the women by the oranges decided to look up and watch us. It was the most romantic thing I have ever said that did not sound like romance. She shook her head. She said I can't. The next hours are a smear. I will not tell them in detail because they do not belong to anyone but us. What I can say is, there was a quiet I will always hate, and a door that should have stayed open, and a kind neighbor who called 911 because he smelled something wrong. There were men in uniforms whose eyes know how to see and look away at the same time. There was a hospital room where a woman in scrubs held my hand in a way that made me wonder if I had ever been held. There were words like there was nothing to do and we did what we could and time of, and I would like to break every clock in Wayne County for having a place for that line on it. Grief is electricity with nowhere to go. It hummed in the walls. It made sounds in the ducts. It turned me into a man who could not sit and could not stand. It took our house, which had been 2 miles wide and full of doors, and made it one room where everything smelled like decisions. The bank took the first step the next day because banks do not send casseroles. Foreclosure proceedings begin is a sentence you can read without understanding and still somehow understand in your ribs. My mother came with the kids and sat on the sofa as if it was trying to hurt her. The school sent an email that said they were here for anything and then called to ask if my daughter could still bring in paper towels for the art room, which is either the kindest or the cruelest sentence that week. If this is a morality play, it has a soft ending and a dark one. In the soft version, the community did something I did not know it could do. The PTA women who had stopped calling showed up with lasagnas and envelopes that had 20s and notes that said anonymous, and it's just a start. A firefighter who remembered my father from union meetings told the shop owner on the next block to give me a month and then another. A man who runs a small foundation in town offered a loan through a program I had never heard of because you only hear of it when you are drowning. My mother's church did a fundraiser that involved kids singing badly and old women baking beautifully, and I stood in the back with my son and pretended we were invisible, while the money in a clear plastic box made the noise paper makes when it changes hands for the right reason. We made a new deal with the bank, less cruel. We kept the house. The kids will go to college, not the one with the brick in the ivy and the sweatshirt people recognize in airports, but a good one with solid floors where people like my kids can learn to build things that outlast men like me. I work 2 jobs instead of 1, and believe in a God I don't understand. I keep the picture of Nina on our dresser, where she is wearing a shirt that is too bright and smiling, like no one has ever asked her to apologize for anything. I have taught myself how to say her name without tasting the ledger. In the dark version, the bank took the house because the bank always wins when you forget that time moves even if you opt out. The kids went to live with my sister during the week because her school district didn't know our story, and her kitchen table did not have the indentations of fists. My name turned into a rumor at school pickup, the way men's names do when they didn't discover the thing in time. The gallery hosted a memorial, and then a sale, and then a going out of business event that was photographed in black and white, because black and white makes failure look like a film still. The music teacher posted a song that I could not like and could not ignore. I took work where I found it and let the machines have my back because people didn't. We rebuilt on a different street in a smaller house where the kids learn that couches are for sitting and eating cereal on and are not for show, and that sometimes the floor creaks because the floor creaks, not because someone is sneaking back in. Here is what did not change in either version. Nina is gone. The 529 was the soft sound of the last safety line being cut. You think the money is a number. It is not. It is a hand you put on the shoulder of a future you promised your children. You think the loft is a room. It is not. It is a story where you wake up and someone tells you need to leave because it's a school day. You think you will see the danger coming. You won't. It will be a cousin at dessert, a memo in a bank portal, a notary stamp that rolls like a coin to your shoe. I have learned to be wary of sentences that start, "I messed up." It is true, and it is not enough. I will tell my kids when they ask later that their mother loved them and made a decision and then another, until the number became a wall. I will tell them that love is not an emergency bill and that art does not accept advances from college funds. I will tell them to notice who uses the word partner and who uses the word cover. I will tell them when a bank portal takes longer to load than usual, it is rarely good news. When people who love us ask what they should do if a cousin at dessert drops a coin into their lives that rolls under the table, I will tell them to look, not at phones, at faces, at ledgers, at letters. I will tell them to be a witness and not an audience, to put the papers on the table and to keep the table. I will tell them that privacy is not a solvent for shame. It just makes the stain set. Would you press charges if emergency bills turned out to be your kid's college fund? Or would you protect the person you love and try to rebuild in silence? If someone confesses at your kitchen table and then takes the choice away, is it forgiveness you owe the memory or a boundary you owe the living? If you want more stories like this, like and subscribe.